are live. Welcome everybody to Lubbock Compact Live for Wednesday, May the 31st, the last one of this month. And usually at the end of the month, we do these shows where Josh and I talk about the city updates. A lot of times we don't get to cover these in our interviews because we're discussing so much in the interviews and there's so much good stuff happening. We don't really want to bog it down too much. And so we love when we get the opportunity to do these shows. These are our old school Lubbock Compact Live type shows where we just try to update everybody on things that are going on in the city and try to break them down in a way that's hopefully a little more easy to understand. I know some of this stuff can be wonky and it's, all these big terms and stuff like that, but we're going to break it down for you, hopefully, and tell you what this could mean or what it could not mean. And so, Josh, you want to kick us off? There's been lots of things happening in the city council meetings.
Dude, there has city council meeting last week. Like you said, we didn't get a chance to get into this, and little look behind the curtain to everybody here, on our group thread. I was just like, this meeting looks boring. I'm gonna watch it later, and then I actually got to watching it. I was like, oh, this is actually really interesting, so this is why we keep our eye on this, so that our adoring public doesn't have to keep their eye on this. So yeah, watch this city council meeting. They were mostly just tidying up some business, but there were a few pieces in there that I thought were really kind of interesting, and a couple of things that I wanted to take apart here with you that I are perennial advocacy areas, I think, and some things that we want to get into more deeply. So as you know, as our audience knows, city council meetings always start with a public comment period. Any person wanting to make public comment on anything that's on the agenda has to be pertinent to the agenda. You can't just go up and talk about anything you want to. Can sign up to do that, and people do that all the time about issues that they have themselves before the council, other things they'd like to speak to. That's our bread and butter. And so last week's city council started with a friend of the show, somebody that we see up there all the time, Ms. Michael Ward. People who have followed city meetings for a while will know Ms. Ward. She runs in some circles and gives a lot of commentary about this. And what she was up there to talk about was was something that she often brings up. Michael is kind of a budget hockey sort of person and often has her eye on how the city's spending money. We sometimes, if not often, disagree on how she kind of sees this, but she was kind of making these comments about LEDA in this case and how some of the LEDA money was being spent. And I thought it was an interesting perspective, and I actually want to get into it a little bit later, but I only mention Ms. Ward because, anybody who's out there doing work on behalf of the public and, takes the time to do their homework and show up and speak on behalf of the public, I just want to give some props to Ms. Ward. Is in some ways a kindred spirit. Now that that's out of the way, we can get into the meat and potatoes of what was actually covered in the meeting. As always, it's usually a lot of city business that's, very perfunctory. The things that I thought were important to bring to our audience is that LEDA, our Lubbock Economic Development Alliance, is expanding a grant program that to this point has been specifically to fund projects in an East Lubbock empowerment zone. This is a certain region of East Lubbock on on MLK, I believe, and Parkway, where folks can apply for grants for building fronts, for building improvements, to start up a business or a project there. It had been exclusively for this East Lubbock empowerment zone, but now they're expanding that to include two other redevelopment zones, one of which is going to be located on 34th Street, and the other of which is going to be on North University. And so this pool of money for these kind of small business development grants is going to now be opened up to 2 additional opportunity zones in Central and North Lubbock. Now, you know, this is exciting to get this in some more geographic areas, particularly those that are parts of older Lubbock, and create pathways for people who might have an interest in a business in those areas. I thought that the one way that this program could be improved and is maybe lacking in its current form is that they're not actually adding more money to this pool. But the pool of applicants is obviously bigger because people might have more of an interest in one of those other zones. So, you know, I thought this was an important and interesting development, and certainly a positive one in that it is opening up more areas, but it could see improvement by, you know, maybe adding more funds to it. Adam, do you want to?
Yeah, no, you know, funny enough, anytime LEDA is brought up, Michael Ward will be there for sure. And her big beef, and this is something I like to mention as often as I can when people bring up things about the budget. Lubbock does not have the severe debt problem that a lot of people would propose that it has. And this is very well documented. Cities, you need to look no further than our bond rating. And a city's bond rating is their credit score. And we have an A+ score in all 3 or 4 agencies, depending on what you're looking at, that look into that. We have an A+ rating across all of those. And so people like Miss Ward and others like to throw out this number of we're $2 billion in debt. The city as a whole is actually $1.8 billion in debt. A huge chunk, $700 million of that is so that we can have water for the next 100 years. I don't know about you. I'm totally cool with that debt. We need water for the next 100 years. So if you want to be mad about that debt, I don't know what to tell you. I disagree. So I think that's a good use of debt. And then there's some other things past that. Now, a lot of that debt is paid not by property taxes, and I'll explain. When the city has budgets set up in 2 different ways. We have the general fund, which is your taxpayer dollars, and then you have the enterprise funds, which are things that are funded by us paying money for them. So if we pay money for a service, if that's electricity, whatever, all of those kind of funds are enterprise funds. And so likewise, when we have debt, that debt is serviced by a very specific thing, and it's not always your property tax. It's not always your taxpayer dollars. The actual amount of property tax backed debt that the city has right now is $350 million. That's out of the entire $1.8 billion of debt. The rest of that debt, like another huge chunk of it, which we'll have Matt Rose here, he'll explain more of this next week. But another huge chunk of that debt is the LP&L things that we had to pay for to get onto the ERCOT system. And so that's a huge chunk of that. That also is paid by that whole situation, not your taxpayer dollars. So it's important for folks to understand that it's not like your budget at home, you know, where all the money goes into one big pot and you can just do whatever you want with it. That's not how it works. And so we may need to do a show, Josh, an entire show on kind of how this budget thing works. That's a short snippet, if you can believe it or not. There's a lot to the budget. Yeah. But you know, what I will say is part of LEDA is funded by the hotel occupancy tax, which is something that the hotels pay so that we can bring things here. And so that's the big job of Market Lubbock and LEDA. I think that they do it as well as they can with the funding that they have. I spent a lot of time, many months, nearly a year, going to
Lost your audio there for a second, Adam.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time looking at LEDA and how it works and what it does. They do a lot of things for the city. There's a lot of things that people aren't aware that they do. but lots of businesses benefit from the LEDA Market Lubbock situation. And so I think this is just a continuation of that. From what I've seen, that board, all of them seem to care a lot about the city and want us to succeed and want businesses to succeed. And so I think it's great that they're expanding these things. But that's my kind of semi-long rant on that for now, at least.
No, I think that's right, and I do want to get into another dimension of this a little bit later when we talk about this one other element. But yeah, I think that is important for people to understand, is that there's many different layers to that city budget, and there's like the grand total, and that doesn't give you like a really granular picture of like which amounts of money are coming out of which sectors and what the appropriate and statutory use of those different funds are. So I'm glad you broke that down. To this point about the city's debt and how it finances the things that we need to have, is that they discussed the issuance of a certain type of limited debt that is called a tax note. And this is going to be issued in order for the city to purchase a couple of pieces of really expensive capital equipment. One is a very expensive fire truck, and another one is a very expensive piece of equipment that's going to be used at the city landfill. And so basically, this is an obligation against property tax revenue and the general fund that will pay out and be completed in the course of 7 years. And how this gets funded is basically this goes forward as a piece of the budget for that department that needs that piece of equipment for those 7 years. So it becomes a budgetary line item for 7 years. Now, in one way, this is like a very limited scope sort of thing. We need that piece of equipment anyway. We don't always have the cash lying around for that sort of thing, although the city is on a trajectory to have those types of cash balances to be able to do more of that just outright. But this helps us get the equipment that we absolutely need in hand in a way that also makes it be represented to the public in a way that truly captures the cost of running our city. And so, this was preliminary discussions with bankers about the issuance of this. It was interesting to see that since the road bond was in, especially during the first run, we were getting a 1% interest rate on the road bond. Now the market is 3 and some change on an interest rate. Our credit rating hasn't changed. Nothing about that has changed. In fact, we've retired debt over this whole time, but the market has this more expensive rating on it. And the only other thing that I'll say before I ask for your commentary on this is, like we've said before, you generate a piece of trash in your house, you buy a thing, it comes in a wrapper. Now you have a piece of trash, you throw it in your trash can, it goes to your dumpster. You think you're done paying for that. You're not done paying for that. We're never done paying for that. Every single thing, we as a city, we're all in for it. We're all paying for each other's collective trash. Here's just another example. And this goes back to a thing that we often harp on, is that some things are just going to have to be paid. And that's why it's important to be being attentive to the long game, to best practices, to evidence-driven policy. Okay, go.
Yeah, no, this is one of those times when, as you said, we're fully behind the spending of these monies. And the thing about the fire truck situation, so we're about to have a new fire station come online in a relatively short amount of time. That was approved, I want to say, last year. And so they're building fire station number 21, and that's just because the city has grown to such a size that we need to add another fire station. And that's what happens as the city grows. That's the only time you'll see a new fire station, is if it's required to cover a specific area effectively. And so that fire station 21 will be, I believe, in the extreme south of the city. And so I'm sure that some of this is preparing for that. The other thing that we're preparing for always is the protection of the city. And we have all of our own types of equipment that you would find in any big city you want to name, New York, LA, whatever, because we have to, out of sheer necessity. If we have some sort of disaster or something going on, we can't wait for Amarillo to send something. That's at least 3 hours for the piece of equipment to get here. All sorts of things can happen in that amount of time. And so out of sheer necessity, we spend a lot as a city, a huge, matter of fact, the biggest part of our budget on public safety and public safety equipment. I'm not sure which piece of the equipment was for the landfill, but there will be some more spending in that area too to make us more efficient, as you said. So yeah, I'm here for it.
Yeah, and then the last piece is just kind of following up on something that we've been watching for a while, but I thought it also kind of tied back to the very way we started this city council meeting. Was the city council finalized creating the tax abatement zone for X-FAB. We discussed this on the show. Basically, companies, businesses need to meet certain qualifications with how many employees they're getting, what kind of manufacturing they're doing, what their practices are, how much they may be reinvesting in the community, and what that looks like in order to qualify for these sorts of things. X-FAB met those qualifications. The city staff recommended that they be granted this tax abatement zone, and now that's completed. And to Michael's comment about LEDA and to this way that our city creates favorable conditions for businesses, there's a fair argument out there, because you see this isn't so much a Lubbock thing, but you see this out there a lot of times where like cities basically get into bidding wars over how much they can incentivize a business coming to their town. And then that ends up with all these downside negative consequences where like Nestle dries up a whole town's water supply or something like that. And so I think it's very fair for citizens to be cautious about these sorts of relationships between their government, which is supposed to be looking out for all of their interests, and these businesses, which are supposed to be looking out for the interests of their owners, their shareholders, their bottom line, basically. And so I thought it was interesting. And, we had made the comment that like, we think this is a good use of this sort of zone because this is the type of manufacturing we want to be attracting to Lubbock, and adding more, an ever increasingly diversified profile to our manufacturing sector, having the types of businesses that will retain more student body coming through Texas Tech and attract others to our city when it is their very niche job that they're looking out for. And so anyway, I just kind of wanted to like tie that up and say like, yes, I think this is a good application of this, and we've seen other good applications of this type of thing like Leprino and this type of thing. And I would add, taking what is basically a public money, even though it was sourced from things like enterprise, and putting it back into enterprise and letting that go through our local system, our local economic chain one more time, in contracting jobs, in employees that these businesses will retain, in services that those businesses need for their own home. This takes that same dollar and puts it through Lubbock one more time. And so anyway, it's just really to say that like all things, this is kind of a complicated sort of thing. And I think it's right to sort of be cautious and to make sure that Lubbock is getting Lubbock and its people are getting its fair deal out of these sort of relationships. But there's a very good argument to be made for why we would have these types of relationships with like X-FAB and Leprino and other sorts of industries. Anyway, if that made any sense at all.
Yeah. We did touch on the opportunity zones, which obviously offer a bunch of incentives for businesses to go to a specific area. Obviously, the two that we have are in North and East Lubbock. And while, I also feel like Leprino will be good for the city and the area. X-FAB, we do want certain types of things. It depends on what it is and where it is. Is the big thing. And obviously, how does it, is it harmful to the environment? Does it take care of the environment around it? And those are all big factors, obviously, that they've got to meet some certain requirements to do that. And so that's good that we have those safeguards. A lot of people put in work doing those opportunity zones. And so we're glad that we have them, and we've had them for a little while. The thing I would like to see, though, in addition to these bigger businesses that are, could possibly be beneficial for the area, I'd like to see more run-of-the-mill, more everyday things that you see in these opportunity zones. Maybe not so much in North Lubbock. North Lubbock's proximity to a lot of restaurants and things is pretty close. But when we talk about specifically East Lubbock, and this is something I know I've probably brought it up here before. I know I've spoken about it a lot as I've gone around the city speaking, for sure. One of the things that a lot of people won't ever understand who did not grow up in East Lubbock or do not spend a lot of their life in East Lubbock, when folks kind of raise a fuss about certain restaurants that they don't like, right, because of their healthiness or whatever, right? Like, so McDonald's, right? People will always want to talk down on McDonald's, and it's nasty, it's bad for you, and yada yada yada. Okay, but a lot of people like McDonald's. Okay, that's just the fact of the matter. Now, let's say you do like McDonald's. Let's say you do want to go to McDonald's, and you go to McDonald's often. Imagine that from your house, every time you wanted to go to McDonald's, it would take you 15 minutes to get there. Now, I say that because I am very aware that if you live anywhere outside of East Lubbock, that is mind blowing to you. There's no world that you live in where it takes 15 minutes for you to get to a McDonald's. You're 5 to 8, eight's a stretch. You're about 5 to 6 minutes away from a McDonald's if you live in any other area outside of East Lubbock, east of I-27. And that's what I want folks to understand, is that when we're asking for things, it may seem silly and arbitrary to some because you've grown up with that around you. You could go down the street to Sonic, you could go down the street to McDonald's or Burger King. You had all your choice of all of the options, whether you wanted them or not, whether you thought they were the healthiest or not. You had that option. If you don't have that option at all and your only option is to drive to 15 minutes or more, 15 minutes is the minimum to get to anywhere other than United Supermarket on Parkway. So anything past that, if you're talking about going somewhere to Milwaukee, I mean, that's a day trip. It's 20 minutes to get there, 30 minutes to get there, depending on the traffic, and it's the same amount of time on the way back. And so I'm passionate about this because I grew up with it. And so many of us grow up with it, and we've talked about it for so long, and we've been ignored for so long. But it's good that precedent has been set, that these opportunity zones have been used. So that's another good thing to this, for this, because one of my goals, and as if I needed another thing to put on my plate, for sure, one of my goals is to try to appeal to some of these franchise owners and things like that, and try to connect them to the opportunity zone and help them understand what the criteria is, because it is important to have that part in there about that they're essentially required to give back to the community in some way, and they need to explain how are they going to do that. Because it's one thing to come in and service an area and get your money and that's it, but it's even better to also give back to that community that is patronizing your business. And so if we could align all of those things together, I think that we could get some franchise owners in there. But that's just my only thing that I would like to add, that I would like to see. And not just franchises. I mean, there's other things, but obviously just the basics that everybody else has access to is all that the people over there want. So
yeah, this just dawned on me, but when I was farming and selling organic produce, it's like if you got down to one head of lettuce, nobody wanted that lettuce, even though there's nothing wrong with it. And you had to have this sort of appearance of abundance in order for people to be like, oh, okay, I'm in there, And so there's like something about our brains where it's like it has to appear to be healthy and vibrant, and there to be traffic and these normal business, the kind of baseline sort of thing. The McDonald's is right there, you know, for us to feel like, oh, you know, this is a good place for me to buy a home, for me to go shop, for me to start my own business, blah, 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 blah. And so anyway, I think there's something about that where like there's some really lizard brain part of our brain where it's like there's a kind of level where we're expecting. Okay, we got a lot to get through, but I've been waiting to, you know, I got to get into this. This is the silly part of this. There was a lot of interesting things that came up in this council meeting, but I got to get this off my chest about these folks. You know, God bless this council. They really know how to get under your skin with some old noise that they'll say. And so I'm like watching this thing. We're getting down to the end where they're hearing all the zoning application, and like nobody showed up for these zoning cases. Nobody showed up to speak in favor for them. Like the people applying for the zoning cases didn't show up to speak in favor of their own application, and nobody showed up to speak against them. And so they're sitting here going through them one by one. And then I'm going to kind of anonymize everybody on the council here. One council member is like, well, you know, we've said so many times, like, if you have a case before us, then you need to come up here and speak in favor of your case. And why doesn't anybody want to come up here and talk to us? And then another one's like, yeah, and like, that's how we get to know you, when you like come up here and talk to us. And I'm like, these people, didn't the very first thing that this council do is change its meeting time, and they were all up there gaslighting all the rest of us and being like, what? It's so that people can get here and talk to us. And we think that if we do this, they will. And it's like, yeah, no, they weren't. They never were. That's never what this was about. This was about, you don't want to stay in council chambers till the evening, which, okay, I don't think that that's the way you should be conducting your business, especially when you got to interface with people. But why don't you just honestly say what it is? You don't want to be there late. Don't try to gaslight us into some old noise like, oh, we think if we change it, like people will come up here. And another thing is like, why would anybody even bother coming up there? Because if there's some big developer, you're never going to deny their case anyway. They don't need to show up to advocate for their case. You're going to approve every single one of them. It isn't the developers who want these big zoning changes that get scrutinized. It's normal people who want the tiniest little thing, the tiniest little wiggle room from the city council, that get all this scrutiny, whether they approve it or not. And there was like one in here where it was like the city staff was like, well, this doesn't exactly fit, and so blah blah blah, we're not recommending it. And the city council unanimously voted for it, and the planning and zoning board voted for it. And I would have done it too, because it's like, yeah, let's just make this work, and so, yeah, sometimes cases do get through and find they're good, but like, how many times have we seen this city council like completely dismantle and take somebody apart and like focus on the completely wrong thing? I wrote in our notes, like, Tipsy, we watched Tipsy's Taco Shack go and apply for a change when there were bars right there next to her, and LISD was like, no, we couldn't possibly, entertain this sort of change. And the city council was like, can't help you. And then the next week, this same council approves Chipotle for the same kind of change when they're right next door to a school. And it's not an LISD school, but nobody on the city council even stood up and was like, okay, like, I don't know, we just didn't do this because we were concerned for the kids last week, but this week we're not concerned. And so it's just like, these people have a lot of nerve sometimes, and they are good and fine people most of the time. I'm not trying to say they're not good and fine people, but they've really got a lot of nerve. And this is another reason why I would like to see faces on that council over time that represent different areas of our city, different sectors, different industries than just the same old stuff, because they obviously have blind spots and they bug.
Yeah, I
Sorry,
mean,
rant over. I'm done.
yeah, you're good. You're good. I mean, we've said this many times before. This was our big beef when they changed the meeting times to 2 p.m. I mean, it's hard for me to make it to the meetings. I still do when I need, when it's absolutely like it's not even I don't even get to go anymore as much as I'd like to. It's just when it's like really drastic and I have to absolutely go, I'll literally go make my public comment and leave because it's in the middle of the business day for anybody. I don't care who you are. It's in the middle of the business day. And so, like you said, the assertion was in the beginning, if we change this to 2 p.m., more people will be able to come in because of X, Y, and Z, right? Because people work night shifts and all these other excuses we heard, right? Okay, fine. You made the assertion and you ran the experiment. And we've ran the experiment for now a year. We've ran the experiment for a year. And I would be curious because they had all the numbers when they changed it. But I'd be curious to see how the numbers have declined of public comments since they've changed it. Because I would say it's probably drastically declined. I know many people who would gladly show up to a city council meeting and give comment or even just sit to be in solidarity, who many times are not even able to go to these meetings we know they would be at. And so it's not just us, it's everybody, it affects everybody. And so that's that part of it. I think it was a bad move. We said it was a bad move in the beginning. It's played out to have been a bad move. And now they're sort of being harassed by the monster they created. So it is what it is. I the other part I will speak on is just to kind of piggyback off of what you said about people representing the city up there. And it's not that, like you said, it's not that they don't necessarily represent the city. They obviously do. They live here. They're from some community here. They represent the city in some way. What we mean is that they do not represent the entire city. And that's not a dig at them. I don't represent the entire city from a demographic standpoint. And that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about from a heart standpoint or from a caring standpoint or from an intelligence standpoint or any other standpoint. From a demographic standpoint, meaning the background that I come from is different from the background which Josh comes from and these council people come from. It's just a fact of life. And when you don't come from a certain background, and you willfully ignore, or at worst, you may just have no empathy for others, then it's going to be very hard for you to understand somebody else's side and where they're coming from. And this is literally why Lubbock Compact was created, because of the feeling that the council is not hearing us from where we are coming from. They're hearing us, but it's not where they're coming from. They don't know anything about it, don't care about it, don't want to know about it, sorry about it, and then they move on. Right. And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate for the city's growth and development. And it's just unfortunate in general that the citizens don't feel like in such a quote unquote small town, right? Everybody says we're a small town, which I don't necessarily agree with. When you get to a town, literally our ranks and different things have moved up because we're a city that's a large enough size to do that. That aside, you would think that if we're such a small town and we're so connected, why is there such a disconnect from our local government when we can literally go and see these folks at United Supermarket or the movies or whatever, right? It's maddeningly frustrating.
Yeah.
And it's, so I'm there with you. We've tried to have talks with some of these folks, and that sort of change has to come from within. If you I'll use an example and I'll anonymize here too. During the last election cycle. There was some school board candidates. Obviously, everybody's aware of that. There was one in particular that was the incumbent who started out with a very different attitude than he ended up with, and I'll explain. In the very beginning of the campaign, he seemed to take the same position that we've seen from lots of people on the school board and city council and yada yada yada. And so it seemed like more of the same, right? Well, his opponent made him work for it, and they had to go to lots of forums, and they had to talk, and they had to like answer questions and all of these things, and they had to come face to face with actual citizens and answer questions from them and deal with them. And at the end of it, from what we've heard, he's changed his ways, and good for him, because it's been noticeable. We've gotten reports from numerous people who are not connected who have told us this person, you know what? Yeah, he used to kind of suck, but now it seems like he's really trying. He's really listening to people. We see him around and things like this. And so it's really any of them could make that switch. And so it's no dig at them. It's more of a proposal for you to do that. Look inwardly. Go have a conversation with these folks and really listen, not from a position of you have the answer already. Don't operate from that position.
Right.
Go in with no expectations, no assumptions, and just listen. And then discern with your intelligent mind, from what you've heard, what would probably be the most ideal policy to make or the decision to make or whatever the case may be. And so, yeah, that's my
Dude,
rant, I guess, over on
yeah,
that one.
no, I was gonna say something else, but that was so perfectly stated that I think we should just move on. Hit us with the community resource spotlight. We still got some ground to cover.
Okay, community resource spotlight. Let's see. We got let me pull it up here. And our community resource spotlight of the day is the Hope Community of Shalom. This is the Hope Shalom church sanctuary that is across the street from Dupree Elementary. Many of you who have followed us for a while know that we advocated for Dupree Elementary to not close. Dupree Elementary is across 19th Street from Lubbock High, so it's in that area. And Hope Shalom is across the street on, I think that's Avenue T or something, from Dupree Elementary. And so they have lots of great programming here, programming there that they do. They give away meals and things like that. There's lots of things, but today we want to talk about specifically the Hope Clothes Closet. And as we know, your clothing can make the man or the woman. One of the things I think about a lot is that and I do look at it as an investment, my investment in my business clothing wardrobe has helped me. It's paid for itself many times over, because when you look good and you present yourself well, things can happen, right? And so if you or someone you know is in need of clothing for anything, not just work, everyday life, school, an interview, whatever it is, then you can check out the Hope Clothes Closet. And they provide all types of clothing. Is completely free of charge, and people can also donate. So if you want to donate, you can go down there and donate. And that's at 2005 Avenue T, right here in Lubbock, in the heart of Lubbock neighborhood. And so if you either are in need of some clothing, or if you'd like to donate some clothing for this cause, great cause, go down to Hope Shalom. It's on 2005 Avenue T, right across the street from Dupree Elementary. And you can also give them a call, and that number is 806-762-0829. And Justin Stice and gang over there are the absolute best. That's also where the Heart of Lubbock Neighborhood Association meets. I'll have to give them a shout out since we're talking about Hope Shalom. That's where the Heart of Lubbock Neighborhood Association meets. Great friends of Lubbock Compact, great friends of the show, and great friends of the community. So yeah, Hope Shalom, Hope Clothes Closet.
So, wait, okay. I should have done this actually first. Do we have any questions or comments, Adam?
I haven't seen any. We're good.
All right, good. Okay. All right. Well, we did have the latest meetings of the neighborhood planners, the neighborhood planning process that's underway for Jackson-Mahon and Dunbar-Manhattan Heights. had their latest meeting where the planners came to town. This time they were presenting kind of the preliminary plan, basically. So after having, gone through all the meetings, taken all the commentary, done all the research, now they're kind of presenting back what the plan was. And like, I just want to give some highlights here. These plans are available on their website. They'll be releasing more work and doing a mailer. Ultimately, this will get presented to City Council. And so I just thought I'd hit the highlights, but like really, the thing that Evelyn mentioned to me, and it's so true about so much work like this, like what we do, like what they do, is that it's not a secret. It's just looking at what we already know to be best practices and kind of implementing that with as few downsides as you can possibly have. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. And so, yeah, a lot of their recommendations were certain types of park enhancements in the existing parks that are there, like different lighting, different equipment, just general landscaping improvement. Obviously, this kind of goes hand in glove with the parks master plan, which is underway and is something that, maybe we could get into a little bit deeper conversation in. But improving existing parks infrastructure was one of them. And another one was that because of the rail lines that are in there, there's some opportunity for what they call a linear park. And like, we don't have a ton of this. We have a few of them in Lubbock, but I mean, it's really just a park that it isn't designed to be like a square or, basically a compact shape. It's meant to be a long stretch of a park. And so basically they say, let's take out those abandoned rail lines and let's put in one of these linear parks. And like, when you think about it, think about taking a walk around your neighborhood. You're like planning that out based on like, oh, okay, like, here are the good sidewalks. And then we cross the street over to here because we like to walk down this one. And there's like that nice tree and we can have a sit down over here. And like these linear parks in neighborhoods are kind of designed to take advantage of that. Like yes, of course, it helps to take you from one place to the other. And in this case, they want to be able to connect the deeper parts of the neighborhood with some faraway parks, particularly the Canyon Lakes. But also it's really just meant to be an asset of the neighborhood where it's like when people are walking through the neighborhood, this is going to be a place where it's like, okay, we just walk from our street to there and then we walk along it and then we turn off on Stick Street and then we come back to the house, and so some of it was park infrastructure. There were like key enhancements, like some very key crosswalks that are necessary to protect pedestrians and make it easier to get around the neighborhood. There were some recommendations to change up some specific mixed use zoning, and some of this does overlap with that LEDA opportunity zone. And so this, creates an opportunity to have a more live work type environment and repurpose some older buildings into some new type purpose and just kind of have a more dynamic neighborhoods where you're combining commercial and living experience. But the key recommendations of this planning was to have a proactive rezoning process. And this is something we've talked about over and over on the show, to make the zoning within this neighborhood conform to the future land use map. And so this is basically like, most rezonings are done by a specific applicant wants a specific thing, and then they come and ask for it, and then it's considered, and the neighbors get a say in it, and blah, 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 blah. This would be the city taking a whole huge section and changing the zoning in it, fiat, particularly the industrial zoning, to transitional or, whatever else is planned for the future for these things. And so like we've laid out before, there are some of these that are abandoned lots or not developed at all that could just go by right. There's some that have existing businesses on it that might move to transitional, and then that could be worked on over time. And then there are others where, you know, they might have some other circumstances. And then the last one, and then I'll get your comment on this. So they want to proactively rezone that whole big section. And then they want the city to create compliance ordinances that will facilitate the transition from non-conforming uses to conforming uses. And so this would be, you know, a very detailed process. It would kind of be a case-by-case basis, where the city would create different ordinances, different regulatory structures to, over time, bring those into compliance. And this is basically like a different way to run at sort of an amortization type phenomenon. So I was really happy to see those included as like top line recommendations for this. Adam, any comments on that?
Yeah, I will say first, I have to, and I do it every time. I know we do it. Probably sound like a broken record, but it's true. The Rio planning group that is working on this has just been phenomenal, and we've had so many frustrations with consultants that have come in, and we raised the same concerns about the industrial sites over and over and over at boards, with the city council, with other consultants, and it's been ignored time and time and time again. And if it was mentioned again at all, it was because we had to make another big fuss about it for them to even kind of sort of bring it up and then dismiss it. And so I will say that just right in line with how they've been through this entire process, they listen to the community, and they included that in as a top line item, and I just have to say hats off to them for that, and I'm very appreciative of them for that. The linear park, I think this is a great idea. You know, the industrial situation, and especially when you start dealing with the railroad, is such a complicated situation that you're just not going to be able to, I mean, we would all love to just snap our fingers and it just all is changed into something more livable, right? Like, but just because of the complexity of it, the amount of stakeholders, the amount of money, the amount of funding these things receive, I mean, it's a huge mess. And so any compromise you can find is really pretty much the best we're going to get. And I think that adding more green space to any area is always going to be a plus. And with it being such a long strip, and it may just start out as a strip of grass, depending on what can be afforded at the time, but you could over time add to this, right? And beautify it along the way and do some things there. And so I think that's a good idea. What was the other thing? There was the third thing.
Some of the key infrastructure, like different pedestrian safety, like
yes, that
crosswalk.
one.
Oh, and also adjusting the bus route slightly so it serves the area a little bit better.
Okay. Well, so this goes hand in hand then. So that's great. Love it. And so the thing I will say about this is that there's a lot of senior citizens in East Lubbock, a lot. And a lot of them in the Dunbar-Manhattan Heights area. And they would love nothing more than to be able to walk up and down the street safely when it's nice out, right? And so walkability is a very low score rating, I would say, in this neighborhood as it stands. And so, I mean, it's good for the entire community, but especially thinking about those senior citizens, I mean, we've got to get that in order. I'm glad that they saw that. I mean, again, listen to the community, and put that in there. I think that's a huge thing. Another thing that we always advocate for many areas of the city. And so that would be a great thing too. And so everything I've heard so far is good.
Yeah, and I know so much to talk about. The last thing I'll say, and like I said at the beginning, so much of this stuff, it's like, yeah, it makes sense. what I will say is what I think is the real teeth of a thing like this is what happens next, where they put together an implementation plan and different funding plans that go along with this. So, yeah, it'll go be presented to the city council as recommendations along with their plans for implementation. And that's where we get to, really see if, how much the city is going to support this, what they're going to put behind it, how much of the implementation that they can get to, and where we can really hold them to account in following through on that planning part. So that's really where I think the important part of this is like, yes, let's get started here. There's more to be done in this whole area. This is an evolving thing. Let's look at that implementation plan. Let's hold everybody to account on that. Okay. Did you want to say something about that?
Well, yeah, I will. I just wanted to add that I wanted to set expectations for everybody and let everybody know that, just like Josh said, when these recommendations go through, and let's say council unanimously adopts it just as it is, that's great and that's a win. The other part of it is that unfortunately, from experience, the advocacy doesn't stop there, because it's not just going to be magically rolled out. Unfortunately, we would hope it would be different, but if it follows the same pattern that it's kind of always done, it could sit there for 2 or more years if you let it. And so there will have to be a period of kind of staying on top of these things and making sure that they're getting pushed through. I am the only other last thing I'll say about it is I'm glad to hear them talking already right now about funding mechanisms and seem to have a plan for that. And so that's something that's way different. I'll let folks know, as far as these consultancy firms we've seen, they generally just do the recommendation and that's it. They turn that in and that's where it ends. So it's pretty exciting to me to know that they actually will also be proposing an actual implementation plan, looking at that as well. So good stuff.
Yeah. If you get a chance to hire these planners, give them a job. Okay. And dude, this is why I love you as a co-host. You always say the perfect thing when I'm trying to move on to something. Okay. If you, I'll give you 2 minutes on this, and then we got it, because I think it's good before we do the other thing that I said we have to do. I'll give you 2 minutes if you want to say anything about Broadway. We just had an open house community meeting about Broadway, what to do about Broadway, what other people want to do about Broadway. I'll give you 2 minutes if you want to put in your 2 cents about Broadway.
Yeah, so obviously, Broadway, something needs to be done with it. It needs to be modernized. And so the question now is, how do we do it? So there's a couple of questions in the how. Number one, how do we want it to look? Number two, how do we phase it out? And that's kind of the two things that we were able to tease out of this first round of public comments. Because so I'll start backwards with the phasing out part. Why you have to phase out a project like this as a city is for a couple of reasons. For the cost and how that funding happens is the big one. Another big one is, how is that going to affect your traffic in that area? What are you going to have to do for what period of time? Like, there's a lot of things to think about. And so Broadway is a long stretch of road that's proposed to be repaired here. So you've got the section that's from University to Avenue Q. Then you have the section from Avenue Q to Avenue E. And then you have the section from Avenue E to Martin Luther King Boulevard. And so those are 3 relatively long sections in their own right. And so that's why you would need to phase it out over time. And so that's going to have to be part of the conversation. How do we do that? What goes first, what goes last, whatever, how many years, all that kind of stuff. The other thing is what do we want it to look like? And so I know that I've seen a lot of people's feedback about the survey, and that it doesn't show you the various options. I will say, and I think we've said on here before, when I was on the street bond committee, we saw, like, there's some renders of the 3 different options. So like full brick, hybrid brick, and what was the other one? I think that was it. I think there was like two different options of the hybrid brick situation. And that was just some quick ones that they worked up to give some ideas of like what things could look like. But the city, from what I can understand, is intentionally leaving it open at this point, because in order to make a more concrete plan, if you will, they need to understand what is the general direction, right? If the people at large say we want all brick, well, that looks very different when you're going out to price things or when you're going out to try to make a plan for what this looks like to implement it, versus, well, if the people at large say no, we want some mix, we don't want it all brick, make it some pavement, some, some historic brick. Okay, well, that looks very different. And so right now, I think they're wanting it to be open-ended. They're just, in general, what would you like to see? Not necessarily how exactly that would look, but do you want all brick? Because there's some people that are firmly, I want all brick, that's it. And there's some people that say, I don't want any brick at all, throw them all away and give us pavement, right? And so you have those two extremes, but then you have the people who are like, you know what? There is value to the historic bricks, so let's use them somehow. So I think a mix would be good, right? Like maybe pavement from intersection to intersection and historic brick all in the intersection with some sort of neat designs in each intersection. The pavement, but then where you park is brick. There's all sorts of different things that could be done, but in general, would you like to see all brick, no brick, or some mix of the two? And that's kind of the general information gathering that they're at this phase. And this is gonna be taking place for a while, so they're not gonna like go off of this one survey and then go run off and start doing things. There'll be more of a conversation, there'll be more public hearings and all of these things as this process moves along. And so I just wanted to kind of let people know that. I know I've seen a lot of frustration about the survey. I would say continue to give that feedback to the city so that they can learn about how to maybe make the next survey a little better, a little more clear. And I've been happy. The last thing I'll say is I've been happy with just seeing the amount of people engaged and actually filling out the survey. And so I think if we keep doing this, we'll be just fine.
That was more than 2 minutes, bro. But
Sorry.
no, I will say, much as you've already said, there's a lot of it seems like there's a lot of very fair points on all sides of this issue. And so that probably means that a lot of compromises are in order. And if everybody will politely, make their cases and also not get to their corners, I think this will have a good outcome. Okay. I wanted to do this. We have the show to ourselves. We so rarely get to do some lighter things. I know we're running over time, but I think this is well worth it for those that have hung out with us for this long. I want to debut this new segment. I wrote down a few things pertinent to the show, pertinent to what we've been talking about. Our first ever Would You Rather Lubbock Compact edition. So, Adam, are you ready to hit up some of these Would You Rathers? Okay.
Yeah, let's go.
Would you rather completing 19th Street take 1 month longer than it's going to already? Or would you rather have the moths back for 1 extra month?
Definitely 19th Street lasting a month longer.
No moths. I know. I've got cats around my house too. They were knocking everything in the hall. They were destroying this house in the moth apocalypse. I'm glad to see those gone. Okay. This is a very Lubbock topic. Which should get here first? A Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods?
Oh man, I have no experience with either one of these. So I'm a horrible person to ask. Sorry folks, I don't eat very healthy. You definitely won't catch me in a Whole Foods. I don't eat the worst, but I also don't eat the healthiest. So I don't know anything about Whole Foods, and I've never been anywhere where there was a Trader Joe's. I guess this is like an HEB or something, or
Nah, it's kind of, I don't know. It's like it's kind of different, but you know how Lubbock loves to obsess about the newest thing coming to town. So I just thought this was such a Lubbock question. And I'll give you your answer, Adam. Trader Joe's has much better snack foods. Okay. So you want a
I'll
Trader
take your
Joe's.
word for it.
I want a Trader Joe's first. I don't care. All you haters that want the Whole Foods, forget it. Okay. Which would you rather talk about for 3 hours straight in a city council meeting, billboards or Broadway?
Oh man. I feel like I've done this already. Man. I think Broadway. I think Broadway for me.
Got to be Broadway. Billboards are a very lame topic that people love to talk about a whole bunch. See, other things that our people around our town love to talk about, I'm with them on this. Every time somebody gets to talk about trash, how many times have we gone to a city meeting and somebody's talking about trash? This is a great topic. Love talking about it. We could have more conversation about that, but folks, you got to chill with the billboards, okay? Okay, last one. Should we see the aquarium first or the multi-purpose event center, the Coliseum?
Oh, the Expo Center, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh man. Like in a perfect world, like if we had funding to do, because I can tell you what's most likely to happen. You're gonna see the Expo Center for sure first before you see an aquarium. Um, I like aquariums. This is a tough one. I would say because it's more general purpose, I would say probably the Expo Center. You're going to get a variety of different things there versus, and I like aquariums a lot, but it's just kind of, it's one experience versus a lot.
Yeah. And I think that this covers over the whole show. This is the last thing I'll say. That's my last question. You did well. I think you picked well, Adam. I wouldn't disagree with most of those. But something we hear all the time about Lubbock, it's like, oh, there's nothing to do here. There's nothing to do here. You hear that all the time. No, there's probably about the same level of things to do here as like any town about this size, but they don't mean, and a lot of times it comes up in relation to the aquarium or when we're going to get our Trader Joe's or whatever, but I think if people would really interrogate what they mean by that complaint, they don't mean another attraction to have here. What they mean is this kind of quality of city living that you see in other places where people are out in their neighborhoods and visiting businesses and walking around and engaging with their neighbors and strangers and all this kind of stuff. And that is absent from Lubbock in many ways, or at least depressed in Lubbock because of how we've built our town. And that's not exclusive to Lubbock. And also there's lots of ways where we can recapture that. But I think it has less to do with building an aquarium or an event center or anything like that, and really reconceiving of how the whole thing operates as an organism. And this is so often the topic of our show. This is so often the topic of our advocacy area. This is something I know you care deeply about. So anyway, just to encapsulate and round off the show, these are the things. This is why Lubbock Compact exists. This is why Lubbock Compact Live exists, to keep our audience up to date and what's happening, and also open up these conversations so that as people engage with their city leaders, their other advocates, other things, a better outcome is had. And couldn't do without you, partner.
Yeah, same. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope that we were able to break some of those things down. I know we talked about a lot, but if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. This is the part where I remind you to join your neighborhood association, because if you did, you would be involved in the neighborhood planning process already if you were lived in the Jackson-Mahon or Dunbar neighborhood neighborhood. So yeah, join your neighborhood association, and we'll be right back here next week. We got a great show coming up. I'm sure a lot of you will be interested in it. We'll have Matt Rose, who is with LPNL, and he will be explaining and answering all your questions about the transition to ERCOT. What does that look like? The timeline on that has been pushed back, so he'll be talking about that. And so if you have questions for next week, make sure you tune in. It should be a good show, and you'll want to be on live because that's your chance to ask the man himself, Matt Rose with LPNL, any of those questions that you may have or any of those comments that you may have. And so thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will see you back here next week. Good night.
Later, man.